And we'll make this something very, very powerful. We've seen it before in the Stein Valley. Joe Foy was there with me when we were starting off at the beginning, and by the end we had 27,000 people coming out to say, no, the logging would not go on. So I want to thank so much the First Nations people of this great area here. I want to thank you for taking care of this land so that we still can enjoy it. And thank you so much for inviting us to come along and join your battle with you. It's a privilege to be here today. Paddling down the river today, I said to my wife, it doesn't get any better than this. And I can't wait until our grandchildren are grown a little older and we can come and bring them to paddle this same area, and they can bring their grandchildren to paddle the area. But make no mistake, what is going on here is a battle, the ultimate battle that is going on all over this planet. It's happening everywhere. I have just returned from 3 weeks filming in South America. And I can tell you the battle is going on every bit as much there. I met with Payakan, a Kayapo leader that Tara and I joined with 23 years ago when he asked us to help him fight a series of dams that were going to be built on the Xingu River watershed and many of the tributaries of the Amazon. And Tara and I brought him up here and we raised $70,000 and sent it down with him. And he had a great meeting at Altamira, the site where the dam was to be built, and we stopped it. And the World Bank pulled its loan back, and a whole series of dams were stopped. 30 years ago, I remember testifying for OSAN. I don't really remember what OSAN stands for. Does anyone remember? Offshore, it was an Aboriginal group fighting the proposal to drill for oil in Hecate Strait, and we stopped it. And I remember coming up here at the invitation of Adrian Peacock to fight to keep the dam at Site C from being built. Damn near lost my life. Our canoes rolled over in the Peace River, and I think that must have been the first paddle to Peace. There were 2 canoes. Both canoes went over, but I was glad to see a few years later that dam was also stopped. But here we are now, 35 years later. And guess what? The dams that we stopped in the Amazon are back on the agenda. And we were down in Rio last month, and we were asked by the same Kayapo people, please help us stop these dams that are going to flood our lands. And here we are at Site C, and we're seeing the same proposal, and the proposal to drill for oil in Hecate Strait. And you see what we celebrated as great successes 30 to 35 years ago, in fact, were not successes. They were temporary, as the man you quoted said, delay, delay. But the requirement was we had to shift the paradigm. We had to shift the way we see our place in the world. And in that, it hasn't changed. I remember, there used to be great redwoods and sequoias and cedars and fir trees up and down the coast of North America, from California to Alaska, the great coastal temperate rainforest. And in Washington and Oregon, the loggers logged out 90% of those great trees. And environmentalists called for no more logging of the 10% that was left. And the forest industry said, see, those environmentalists are greedy. They don't want you to log any more trees. And think of the jobs. And this is a crisis that we face. We're left now with the last few great places on the planet. And we're still being called greedy. We're being called radical. We're opponents of economic development and jobs. We have a great challenge ahead of us. And the challenge is this. The world we live in is dictated by laws of nature. We have to live by the laws of nature. In physics, everyone knows you can't build a rocket traveling faster than the speed of light. Einstein told us that. No one would say, oh, I want to be able to travel twice the speed of light. We live with it. The laws of gravity say that you can't have an anti-gravity machine on Earth. And the laws of entropy tell us we can't build a perpetual motion machine. Those are laws dictated to us by physics, and we live with it. In chemistry, it's the same thing. There are laws governing rates of reaction, diffusion constants, and the molecular properties of, or the atomic properties of various elements that limit the kinds of chemical reactions we can carry out and molecules we can synthesize. We know that. That's dictated by the laws of chemistry. And in biology, there are laws dictated as well, that in order to survive and flourish, we must obey the laws of carrying capacity of ecosystems. We know that we as terrestrial creatures have an absolute need for clean air, clean water, clean soil, clean energy from the sun, and biodiversity. Those are the things that keep us alive. Those are the things that we have to pay attention to because our very survival and quality of life depend on them. Other things, though, we draw lines around our property, around our cities, around our states, around our countries. And boy, do we take those lines seriously. We will go to war. We will kill and die to protect those boundaries. But you know what? Nature couldn't give two shits about human boundaries. We have salmon. We have salmon that are born in the rivers of British Columbia, but they have to pass through the Alaskan Panhandle, and then they go out into the Pacific Ocean. Whose fish are those? They don't belong to any human nation, and yet we try to rationalize our behavior to the natural world. I mean, do trees pay attention to our boundaries? Does water or air? Think of migrating insects or birds or fish. Nature couldn't care less about human borders. And yet when you see the kinds of negotiations going on at Rio last month, 192 nations gathering to talk about the atmosphere that doesn't belong to anyone, trying to squeeze the atmosphere into the agendas of our national boundaries. It's crazy and it will never work. And then there are other things. We create concepts like capitalism, like the economy, like markets, like corporations. These are not forces of nature. We invented them. And if they don't work, those are the only thing we can change. We can't change the laws of nature, but we can sure as hell change the kinds of constructs we make. And yet we bow down before them as if they're great forces of nature. I was talking to Preston Manning a few years ago, and he's made a lot of sense, and we were chatting, and I suddenly said, yeah, but the market, and the minute I said market, it was, the market, hallelujah, the market, praise the market, free the market, let the market do its thing, and everything will be all right. What kind of bullshit is this? We invented the market, for God's sake, and if it doesn't work, change it. But this is the problem. Now, why is it that we've come to elevate the market, the economy, and corporations so high? We've undergone a fundamental shift in our relationship with the planet, and it's happened very, very suddenly. All indications are our species was born 150,000 years ago in Africa. Now, I know a lot of people don't like that idea that we're Africans all under the skin. That was our birthplace. And for 95% of our existence on Earth, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. We knew that we were deeply embedded in nature and dependent on nature for everything that we needed and for our well-being. We knew that. And then 10,000 years ago, we discovered agriculture that brought in a fundamental shift in the way that we lived. We no longer had to follow game and plants through the seasons. We had a stable source of food and we could stay put, and we got the growth of cities and so on. But even in 1900, when there were only 1.5 billion people in the world, there were in fact only 14 cities with more than 1 million people. London was the largest city with 6.5 million people. Tokyo was the 7th largest city with 1.5 million people. The vast majority of people in the world lived in rural village communities because we were farmers. And farmers know very well that weather, the climate, the seasons are absolutely crucial to whether or not we do well in the coming years. Farmers understand that insects are critical to pollinate flowering plants, that certain plant species will take nitrogen from the air and fix it as fertilizer in the soil, that the amount of snow you get in the winter is directly related to the moisture in the soil in the summer. Farmers know that we are deeply embedded in nature and that we depend on nature for our well-being and our survival. In only 100 years, by the year 2000, the world population had quadrupled to 6 billion people. But now there were more than 400 cities with more than 1 million people. Tokyo in the year 2000 was the largest city in the world with 26 million people. Can you imagine? Greater Tokyo today has more people than all of Canada. And if you've ever been to Tokyo, you know human beings shouldn't live this way. But in the year 2000, the 10 largest cities all had more than 11 million people. And in Canada, over 80% of us now live in big cities. So there's been a fundamental shift in 100 years from a rural agrarian animal to a big city dweller. And in a big city, our relationship with the rest of the world fundamentally changes. We live in a human-created world in which it's easy to think we're not like the rest of nature. We're so smart, we create our own habitat, and as long as we have a few parks out there where we can play and camp and go skiing, who needs nature? I have a friend who lives in the northern part of Toronto in a high-rise apartment building, completely air-conditioned. He told me in the morning he goes down an elevator into the basement, gets into his car, drives down the Don Valley Freeway in his car, which is air-conditioned, into the basement of a commercial building, up into his office, all of it air-conditioned, and that building is connected through tunnels to huge shopping areas and food markets. And he said to me, David, I don't have to go outside for weeks. That's the kind of world that we're now inhabiting. Who needs nature when you live in that kind of a situation? So in a city, what is our highest priority? In a city, our highest priority is our job, because we need a job to make the money to buy the things that we want. And so now that we've transformed ourselves from a farming species to a city dweller, the economy becomes our highest priority. And we've disconnected that economy. We don't see the consequences of living within that economy. The reason why this area is going nuts over gas and oil is because we are living in the cities. We want to live the way we do. We want to pay the money and make sure our homes are heated in the winter, that our air conditioners run in the summer, that we've got cars that we can gas up. All of that is what we think. Well, I work, I make money, and I just want to make sure that those things come without any understanding of the consequences of what we are doing to the rest of the earth. So this is the challenge that we face. We've disconnected ourselves from the real world and elevated the economy above the very things that keep us alive. We have a prime minister who has had childhood asthma, who in this century was taken to the hospital with a severe asthma attack. Now, you would think anyone with asthma would understand what you put into the air, you put into your body with consequences. And yet here is a man that says, we can't do anything about reducing atmospheric pollution. It'll destroy the economy. So even an asthmatic, for God's sakes, has elevated the economy above the very things that keep us alive. So as we elevate the economy, and you know where the dam at Site C has been being driven by the argument, we need the energy to power our society, specifically for the liquefied natural gas plant that's going in at Kitimat. We need this to create jobs. This is absolutely crucial. But in elevating the economy above everything else, we fail to ask the most elementary questions. What is an economy for? How much is enough? Are there no limits? Are we happier with all this stuff? We're not asking the critical questions. And by fighting against this dam at Site C, I think that it's important now to raise these deeper issues that we didn't raise 30 years ago when we fought against that same dam. If we don't shift our place in the world and see that we are utterly dependent on the rest of nature for our well-being and survival, if we don't understand that every bit of wilderness is absolutely crucial now to our long-term survival, that we cannot attempt to take over the entire planet. If we don't change our relationship with the earth, then it seems to me this fight will go on and on until we've used it all up. And I just want to end with a story that the great teacher, my great teacher and mentor, was my father. And when in 1994, when he was 85 and he was dying, I moved in to care for him in the last weeks of his life. And it was one of the most wonderful times that I've ever spent with my father. That intense period, and we laughed and we cried and we talked. And at night, Tara would come with my children and bring slides of trips we'd taken, and my dad would say, "And what wonderful adventure are we going on tonight?" And it was a joyful time. And he said to me over and over again, "David, I die a rich man." Well, he didn't have any money, and it was confusing to me until I thought about it. All we talked about when we were together, we never talked about, "Gee, do you remember that 1986 Dodge that I bought? Do you remember that house we bought in London, Ontario, or that closet full of clothes in 1999? All we talked about were family, friends, and neighbors, and the things that we did together. And to my father, that was his wealth. And in those things, he was truly a rich man. We've got off on some weird tangent about what it is that life's about and what makes us happy. And I believe that you're all here today to say that there is something fundamentally different. Tara and I have been into all of the 10 communities, in coastal communities from north of Vancouver Island to Haida Gwaii. And these are communities, First Nations communities, that are desperate for jobs and economic development. And you can bet that Enbridge has offered them millions of dollars of incentive if they'll allow the pipeline to go through. And yet the coastal First Nations are 100% against this pipeline. And they're telling us, but the important lesson is that there are things more important than money. And that's the lesson that we have here. Thank you very much.